As you said, my name is Steve Skillicorn. I'm a clinical engineering manager for St. Luke's Health System in Boise, Idaho. My main job is managing medical equipment services for the system, and then also doing capital equipment planning and replacement. So I'm going to have everybody around the room introduce themselves. So Brian is an associate of mine. We do a little bit of consulting on the side at times. We both worked at Philips Healthcare for many years with each other. So, Brian?
Okay, yeah, he did a very good job. I've been in this space for that days. He was a biomed and I was a field engineer at GE. So, I have a background in service operations for diagnostic equipment and with GE and Philips and component but also capital equipment sales. So, like Dean said, I had a dabble in the consulting role a little bit with customers like yourself.
Lenny?
I'm Wendy Fryer with Siemens sales.
These Glasgow multi-medical systems, which provides like primary technicians throughout the U.S. as needed.
Sure.
Johnny Chalkis, Director of Procurement for Qual.
Sai Jamal from San Francisco Medical Center.
Jacqueline Palmer from San Diego Medical Center.
Dan Nichols with Astrocritic Labs.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Hill 626 MJ, Director of Operations.
Robert John with radiology planning, design, construction firm focused on radiology and information.
Barry?
Eric Herman, I'm the Vice President of Tech Management in Tech for Vanderbilt. He's Phoenix, Arizona.
Chris O'Toole, former.
Phillips Pro, yes, your name is very familiar to me.
Jason Gonzalez from
Dan?
Dan Evans, Global Solutions.
Greg Ditka, Director of Radiology and Cardiology at Savage Medical Center in Pine Falls, Oregon.
And two gentlemen in the back, there's seats if you want to sit.
Max Gabby with Caliber Companies, Chicago.
Richard Tribe from San Francisco, TA Medical Center.
Cool. All right, so Brian and I kind of design this course around insourcing solutions, okay, for radiology departments and small facilities that may or may not have the ability to, have in-sourced or in-house opportunities, or are in the process of developing in-house opportunities. So
I can sit here and manage.
it works a little bit,
I'm gonna go get Carl.
Yep. It's not the first time you've seen this damn Aquarius.
There you go. Didn't move for a second then. Hit that space parking. There you go.
Yeah, that's one. It was working a few minutes ago.
It's working now.
Oh, is it working now?
Hit it.
Yep. Okay.
All right.
It's your magic touch.
I get that
So a few of the things that we want to talk about is understanding the contracts, analyzing the data that can be developed before you contracting or during your contract, building contract structures, managing and assessing the agreements themselves, negotiating agreement, teamwork. One of the things I think is very important is establishing key performance indicators, not just what the vendor puts into their contract, but what you may need to have for your facility itself, in your operations, managing OEMs, vendors, themselves, a little discussion on point of sale agreements, managing fleet technology, and then the last thing we're going to talk about is make-back situations. Okay. One thing I'd like to do is have you pull your major questions until the end of the presentation so we can have a chance to have some really in-depth discussion. I'm going to kind of move through this quickly. If you need a point of clarification, please make so at that time. Okay? Not the same contracts. Data is knowledge at least better decision. So the better your data and the quality, the easier it is to make a decision about what you're trying to do, right? So, do you understand the complexity and details of all of your service? What's buried inside your service? So, if you have a service agreement, I'm going to pick on things. Do you understand the complexity of the design of their agreement and the services that they have buried inside that agreement? What the value of those services are to you? And I don't mean just from a utilization standpoint, but is there a potential time and materials consequence for those agreement services outside of agreement if you didn't have one, or your inability to have those? A lot of people say in-house, you talk to a lot of biomedical engineers, clinical engineers, contract, and they're evil. I don't look at it necessarily like that. I think the vendor needs to be managed, okay? But I look at it that there are some good things to contracts, okay? They do provide value, but you have to understand what's in the service to perceive that value. Okay? What is most appropriate data that's needed to initiate this process? So what do you need to look at for data? How does the service vendor price their services? You have to understand how an OEM prices their service agreements and how they develop it, and how somebody like an ISO prices their service agreements, and the budgets that are built inside those agreements. What are the value added services, and do you need them? How to influence agreement language and which language can be changed. Because there are terms and conditions that can be changed. Okay? What performance indicators are and how they can be positively affected for delivery to your organization, and how and when to hold service vendor performance review meetings, otherwise known as quarterly business or performance reviews. How many of you who are radiology directors hold performance reviews with vendors? Okay.
Good ones?
Huh?
Realistic good ones?
Okay. So you're not communicating with the vendors, right? And they're not communicating with you for performance, right? It's an opportunity for improvement, right? Okay. It'll change, yes. So how do vendors serve? Do service vendors set agreement pricing in their own budgets? Anybody tell me? Just like told me. Brian, you price agreements, so
It's a combination of a lot of things. It's term, it's volume of equipment, it's volume of new business coming. If you're an OEM, it's the competitive nature of the market you're in. It's the cost of the equipment and their logistical structure. Knowing their size and scope. Those of you who've been in business a long time know also it's not your headline. But knowing that and who you're working with, how you're doing, you're putting those vendors to compete against each other. It's also important.
yeah, and it's also for us in clinical engineering prevalent to understand, Gary probably, and probably will better than I do, is you have to understand your failure rates on the devices. Okay, what's the mean time between failure in the system? We were talking about this in their manual. Parts, components, major systems, tubes, detectors. What are your failure rates? Because if you're going to look at developing an in-house clinical engineering structure, do you move the services in-house? Do you have the people, appropriate people? And do you have the time to be able to service it? But with big component failures, it can be a point for it. And so you need that data and the cost analysis and understand how the vendor develops that. Because they take mean time between failure to set their budget that they have internally in the service agreement as performance standards for themselves. And if you understand how that's developed and understand those cost ratios, then you can take a look at that, because those should be able to drive your in-house businesses as one key indicator. So what does the service vendors data indicate? Well, working with people like Lindy and their regional service managers, okay, from the OEM perspective, if you're sitting down having your quarterly business reviews, then they're going to be able to give to you information and data that's key for you to make a decision. And then you either agree with that data or you ask them for further. Okay? What are value-added services impacting the worth of the delivered services and how to evaluate them? You have applications training in your service. You have applications support, remote servicing support. What other things are tied into your service agreement that you don't know or understand? And it's just being educated. If you go to buy a car, think about this. You take a look at what's under the hood. All of the options available when you're purchasing a car. Well, if you're not doing that in your service agreement, purchasing services, you do in your organization. Determining the value of labor, parts, and vendors anticipating to spend with your equipment via agreement versus hourly billed services. Can anybody tell me what that means? Is that just comparing what your time and materials charges are when the vendor performs the services versus what you've had in-house done? And understanding what those cost ratios are? Or if you wanted to get a third party vendor to do your services, understand what those price points are, how to compile all data into dashboards. We're all into dashboards today, right? And key performance indicators that create better agreement, deliverable language, and overall service. So building contract structure, you want to have things that are flexible and objective for deliverables. So work with your supply chain and contracting teams. At St. Luke's, I have 1, 2, 3, 6 individuals I work for contracts, depending on who the vendors are. All of our supply chains are built up are based upon certain vendors, even from the purchasing side, so that we align people who we're working with. And so I say the same point of the contract and all of that stuff. Write your own terms and conditions first, then review the vendors. Why? Barry?
You know what, since you called me, I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
We're talking about that supply chain rate, the contract. So this is sort of a structural question about savings. Is that a centralized function in your health system? Do you have to work with teams and hospitals?
Great question. No, we are centralized with several things. We're centralized with IHT, which is our Information Health and Technology Division, which clinical engineering is a part of. I'm a part of the applications portion of IHT. So clinical engineering reports up through IHT. Supply chain is centralized for the whole system. We don't have individual buyers sitting in each of the individual hospitals. They each have a population center that they're responsible for. So we have 3 population centers in our system. One is out of Twin Falls, one is out of Boise, the other one is out of Meridian. And they have almost an equal number of patient beds that they're responsible for and clinics that they're responsible for. But each of those supply chain people from contracting has their population center, as does the purchasing. And then our legal department encompasses the whole family system. Great question up there. So why would I want to write my own terms and conditions in and review the vendor?
I don't know why Dean does it, I'll tell you why I do it.
That's why I'm asking, actually. I'm picking on you, but.
Well, because, you know, a third party employees don't know necessarily what I want. I mean, I've been essential for days, the only one that knows what I want is me. Like, well, I have a pre-script what that is, I don't have to prepare things. I mean, that's kind of how we look at it. Like, we need a basis for what
That's a great answer, and that's where I was driving. If you have to know what you want first, and Libby knows that's what I do, because I'm new at savings. I've only been there for 10 months. And working with somebody like Libby gives me the opportunity to say, well, I understand what you're talking about materials situation or your terms and conditions say, but they don't really meet my expectations. So somebody new like me coming in the door can confuse somebody like Wendy for a little bit, which happened, to be quite honest with you. But it took teamwork with Wendy and I to sit down and iron out what it was. And it took me reviewing terms and conditions and then having a discussion with Wendy about terms and conditions to get us aligned to where we can now develop a contract going down the future for us that's going to make sense for our organization. Establishing your KPIs, focusing on your values and needs, your patient safety needs, uptime, useful uptime, staff levels. Okay, especially this one. If your high reliability organization is what your top priority, right? I don't care if you're from Lenovo, GE, Philips, Siemens, or from St. Luke's or from Health. If you're high reliability, this one is the top priority organization. Include cancellation provisions, loss of business, even department, that's the last step. Technology obsolescence. A lot of people and organizations, depending upon their size and their structure and the way that their finances may be designed, might miss this one, especially smaller organizations. Dependent upon the volume of business from the vendor and legal allowances. Review all contracted all contractual inclusions for value and have measurable deliveries. Make sure that what you're going to write into your agreement fits what your operations are and measure. Work closely with your supply chain management and legal departments to ensure that the contract reflects what your organizational needs are. The OEM vendor is going to do what they feel is best for them. You need to be able to present what's best for your organization, and then it's a combination of negotiating what's best between both. Okay? Managing and assessing agreements, the devil is in the details. We've all talked about data before. Quarterly meeting cadence at a minimum. If you're not meeting with your vendor and understanding what they're delivering to you and using their deliverables that they want to present, you're never going to have the data to be able to effectively measure the performance of your contract. Because you're going to ask for it at the end of the contract period, 6 weeks before it's due, and it's going to be tough to try and present that that data. If you have it on a scheduled cadence, you can sit there and say, we're trending in the right direction, we're trending in the wrong direction. And how do we make corrections to trend? Does your structure your meetings primarily around performance? I know a lot of organizations like to have the overall thing. I like technology myself. But in the end, these meetings should be about performance. Okay, whether it's from the sales side or the service side. Does your data align with the vendors? If you're an in-house organization, you should be matching your data to what the vendor's data is. And if you are not matching that data, you don't belong in your job. Dan's sitting back there shaking his head is, you know, it's correct. You have to manage what your vendor's supplying to you and take your data, make sure it matches up. Because if it doesn't, then you need to get with the vendor and see what the gaps are. Are they on your side or are they on the vendor's side? Okay. Compare your work to establish KPIs. Okay. So what tools are you going to use in your assessment? So you need to develop tools from your data and what your KPIs are to keep measuring performance. And I don't suggest that you use the same KPIs, but every 2 to 3 years at max. If you've got something that's hidden, find another KPI to measure because you don't have a problem. You can continue monitoring it on an annual basis to see if it's still effective, but find something else that you might have a problem with, you know, monitoring. How do you monitor vendors' performance? You need to define the methods, the processes, and the systems. Are they defined in the contract? Make sure that they are. Who within your organization helps evaluate its effectiveness? Is it custom? I go to my radiology department managers, I measure performance with them, and I say, I'm seeing this, what are your technicians seeing when the field service reps, or even my staff do service? So make sure that you're meeting with your customers to make sure that the vendor's effectiveness is what you want it to be, and you can compare that to potentially what your own staff's doing. Okay, especially if the vendor's doing a superb job of providing the service. If you decide to take something in-house and look at this, and you don't do a good job on it, I guarantee you a radiology director will cut your heart out. So negotiating, it's about teamwork. Can't do it on your own. None of us can. Okay? So you're going to leverage your data to support your needs. You're going to understand the vendor's pricing methodology. Excuse me. It's different for each modality. Understand list prices for base coverages and line items for key components, tubes, detectors. God forbid you still haven't mentioned intensifiers, but transducers, after hours labor, any additional clinical education that you need above and beyond what you've had. As your organization expands, or if it condenses, do you need all of the additional clinical education? You may or may not. If you've had high turnover, you're going to potentially need more for a period of time, right? So what can you do? You contract a certain amount and then understand what the time and material charges are going to be up and above. Start with the agreement list price, often for a 1-year term, and avoid multi-year discounting until all equipment inventory, their options, are accounted for in the quote. It doesn't work to try and get discounting up front before list pricing understanding. You have to understand what that is and then go from there with your volumes. Understand your mean time between failures as a system, as a locality, as a particular system, and to major component level. Refine to build master service agreements if appropriate. What do I mean by a master service agreement? You know, Ryan?
It'll come up a little bit later, but it's fleet management essentially. So ultrasound is a great example. Because they're on wheels, they move around, you replace them and update them. You don't always get rid of the older ones, so you have to still maintain them. So knowing, how many update model manufacturing system you have across your fleet, and then making sure that if you have multiple agreements that you might have different needs across each one of those in different departments, you have a better by having their agreements, their service agreements, and at the same time, you have a better leverage position if you need to go out and have that OEM or that ISO do the service for you. Or again, if you're doing a partner. Looking forward.
Yeah, I mean, that, you have one.
I was gonna say, I mean, you have on an MSA, you have binding terms and conditions and allows you to onboard and offboard equipment as you see please, right? And on all the equipment that you onboard, take on those terms and conditions.
Maybe quarterly reconciliations.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you're doing one invoice on a quarterly basis.
And then when it comes to invoicing as well, you have consolidated billing as well.
Absolutely. And you have a standard set of terms and conditions for everything that's on the contract. It's all the same. So if it ever comes to a performance issue with the vendor, it's the whole contract. Okay. Keep your leverage position, know your leverage positions and negotiation from a position of power. Okay. Information is power. I love working with her. She's one of the best service sales specialists I have the opportunity to work with. But she knows that, we're her customer. And what she does is she appreciates the fact that we have to do things for our organization. I can't say that for every sales specialist. Okay? Make sure you know your service salespeople and your service managers if you're going to contract with them. You need to have an intimate, I would say intimate, but a very good relationship and understanding with them so they understand your organization. You got to remember, they deal with 30, 40, 50, 60 organizations at a time. It's a tough job to do. Okay? Everybody's needs are different. St. Luke's is different than our other sister organization, through Trinity Health at St. Alphonsus. I can tell you, Harry's got several hospital organizations in Phoenix. Their needs are different than ours. Just make sure you understand your needs and that your vendor understands your needs. Establishing KPIs, we talked about vendors that build around their margins, metrics. Okay, that's their job. Focus to meet your organization. Make sure your patient care and safety expectations are well communicated. Involve your clinical customers and what effects they have to their operations. Identify those. Involve your supply chain management to align with other organizational needs with the vendor. I.e., I have a vendor that I'm having service issues with. Oh, they have a purchase coming up. Does that affect how I negotiate with them in the future? Yes, it does, or it can. All of your KPIs or objectives need to be SMART. They need to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. We all know that as management people. Are the vendors' manpower quantities and levels here to meet your needs? Not necessarily their zone or their region needs, your needs. Okay? Because if you don't have manpower to meet your organization's needs, it doesn't do any good to have the equipment under contract because you're going to be at odds with them.
Yeah. Like an example of that, probably over a level head. If you have a certain level of expectation of on-site field service or parts, can they deliver them? Are there manpower within driving distance of the flight? Is there a parts out of the field 24 hours a day? It sounds obvious when you say it, but it's tough to sometimes make sure that it's true.
We're gonna, okay, our vendor, our line KPIs to vendors coverage levels of desired or delivery guarantees. Evaluate quarterly against multiple year track record. Uses a tool, not as a measurement. It's not about the measurement, it's about the tool. We want to see trends. Ensure the service vendor knows how their services affect our organization. I can't say how many times in my career, or the last 30 some odd years, that I've had vendors come in and they just don't understand my organization and how we deliver patient care. They have to understand how your service is functioning, how your patient care is organized in your organization. Does KPIs non-compliance result in the vendor financial penalty? And I know Lindy's wanting to hold her eyes up at that one, but does it? Can it? Is it something that you can negotiate to? Because a lot of vendors are going to tell you, if you lose revenue, they won't reimburse you for your revenue. So what penalties, if they don't perform, are in place for them to understand that they have an effect on themselves if they poorly do their service? Work toward all vendor equipment service agreements, of course, to be coterminous. Point of sale agreements, I'm going to let Ryan handle this one. He has more experience with point of sale than I do, but
Put me on the spot.
yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot.
And part of the reason Dean asked me to jump in right now, because I was on the capital equipment sales side for many years. So I always package service agreements with the large purchases, just because, especially if it was brand new technology or the customer didn't have a lot of that particular model, there was going to be a learning curve if they had an in-house organization. So, and it was also the best leveraging time because I sold service and delivered service for so much of my career. I knew that was the best time to get the best price as well, because you can leverage the service price to the equipment purchase and vice versa. So if you have a committee or a chair of radiology that absolutely wants X, and it's one of the first ones in the market, well, they're going to fight like hell for it. And that's the best time, if you don't have the in-house skills necessary, to work with the OEMs and say, okay, well, what's the best deal? Yeah, because that service pricing sometimes might be a stickler for their discount. But they'll certainly work with their capital partners to make sure it gets happen. So it's just a way, I try not to look at it as adversarial. You're just trying to lay out the foundation. Customer, St. Louis in this example, wants equipment, doesn't have the in-house capability to take care of it. So how are you going to get the best price, the best service, et cetera? And I don't have to go through, I guess, every single one of these bullets, but signing that agreement at the time of sale of equipment is probably some of the best discounting area. I'll never say ever or full. There's always what ifs. You can go through the bullets when you're talking about a lot of the same competitive things we talked about before about data and tracking. And it's all dependent, like the last two bullets, depending on the operations of your organization. I think Dean did a good job of saying it, but as a vendor or as an OEM service provider, they have to align with what's important from a patient safety, patient workflow perspective. And you do that through meetings and conversation. You can't just give them a list and it'll happen. Maybe better things to ask the group question. There's a lot of vendors in this room versus customers, so or OEMs. So my base here, or we off base myself. It's Dan, you've been doing this a long time. I mean, call you out.
You want to take one service?
I'm curious, yeah.
Well, like, so, right now, I don't like it. I don't like it. I'm an ISO, so I don't like it.
Yeah, mine's that.
Right, but I will also tell you, when I was a clinical engineer in-house, what I found that whenever we brought on new technology, everything you say about which all the benefits of a pro service agreement are true.
Right.
Here's what I found out, almost every vendor, they'll say, this is a one-time offer. And I found that very simple.
Okay, so, and I'm gonna agree with you, Dan, because Brian and I don't necessarily, we differ a little bit, okay? Because, well, you know me, just like you, I've been in the house a long time, having worked with Phillips for a long time, and worked through ISOs, okay? I see some benefit depending upon the size of your organization, okay? If you're a small critical access hospital someplace, you know, that's remote, and you don't have a corporate affiliation or something like that, you know, probably a point of sale agreement is something that you're gonna want to strongly consider. If you're a large operation like Amp Health, you really don't need, and you have an imaging team like Perry has, you don't really need to have a point of sale service agreement. Because you're most likely already to that point that you're servicing that technology in-house. So the game is, understand what your needs are, your organizational needs, and then negotiate these if you need to negotiate them. They're a contract, just like any other contract.
Yeah, I will say though, that as an ISO, as Redondo, we have come back to customers and said, this is what we have for point of sale, and we have directed the customer that way.
Yeah, and Dan, if I was working for you guys when you were reporting to me as an ISO, okay, and I was an administrator, I would expect that as an ISO.
Yeah.
To come to me and say, you don't need it because we're here to help you try and save money and offset spending money with the vendor. We can manage their services through our people. I would expect that some type of budget regime would be done.
Yeah,
Situation.
I mean, the bottom line is there's no one size fits all approach. I mean, you really got to analyze each situation you come across over time, because if it was cookie cutter or jigsaw puzzle, we all would have bought a book, gotten a mouse pad and a t-shirt, we could sit in this room.
Well, and remember,
like, your point of sale agreement, you're not stuck in that for 5 years.
Right.
And you can change the coverage. So, but I wouldn't, and but I would say, like, hey, favor signing point of sale, not because it doesn't mean anything. In fact, it just relates, but you get more warranty. So if you're looking at your total cost of ownership, and then you want more warranty, and it is you don't plan on servicing it yourself, then you should probably sign a point of sale, because you can negotiate in a year warranty and often better equipment purchase price. But if you know you're going in-house, then, I mean, signing a point of sale, that's.
Yeah, then you don't need
You know how it's fair.
Yeah. Then you don't need to go such a
You
long.
don't necessarily need the longer term. Longer term means better discount, but then if you have an MSA, your discount may be fixed. So if they say you get a 50% discount if you sign point of sale, but if you don't, then it's 40%. So there's some, like, don't look you cover.
Yeah, and it's all about leverage. You know,
Yeah.
what do you have?
Yeah.
Who has?
well, and it also depends, and a lot of people don't do this, but it also depends on you knowing what your capital equipment replacement plans are for the future, okay? Because if you know how you're gonna capitally replace your equipment, then you know how you're going to be servicing.
Yeah, most of that.
Yeah. Okay, managing fleet technology. Jeez, I wonder if anybody in this room has to do this. Brian, when I talked about this, we decided to measure it, no, that's measured twice, and cut once. Your data and vendors still, you need to know your data, and vendors still future models for life cycle planning. This is pretty much about technology management. The vendor should be able to supply all the data such as operating system, software, hardware revs.
It's a tedious process.
It is a tedious process. My point to the vendors is it should not be.
Well, again, it comes back to team, right? If you have a log, if you're an in-house organization, you've been managing things your whole time, you should have a chance of that. If you're an independent service organization and you're going in, you should be managing the inventory. You should know what you have. It's probably 90% of, I don't think it's a job, but that's a big part of it. And you have to know, and you'll have to go out and physically inventory things occasionally, which nobody loves to do. But, yeah.
And I already mentioned the next one, technology planning is an important part for service planning. And just, and understanding total cost of ownership. Build plan with key organization numbers. That establish replacement plans by modality based on when to replace. The one thing that I saw in my current organization that made me chuckle was I looked at all of our technology and it was planned to be replaced in 20 years, no matter what. You know what I'm talking about, okay? St. Luke's did not do a very good job of understanding when its technology needed to be replaced by modality level. They were trying to replace MRs and CTs at the length that you would replace general radium. You can live with a general radium and walk 100 feet. You can live with CT or MR without doing upgrades to it. So they got into, just before I got there, then it was a couple of years before I got there, they finally got into obsolescence management with the MRs and the CTs. And it's a very important part of contracting, folks, and understanding obsolescence programs can be useful if you don't have a good, strong capital budget. You can offload it to the operations side. Okay? Or you can capitalize it. It's up to you and your organization. Understand the life cycle of each modality and when those software hardware refreshes should start, and have them planned so you understand what that potential cost is. Okay, there's a lot of other things here. Here's the one that I use, Gantt chart. I have spread out every modality in our organization for 20 years of planning. 20 years, showing them when the next piece of equipment needs to be replaced for 20 years. Understand that most product lives last between 18 to 20 years at the most. And that's a long time. It should be less than Perry, I see you squinting here.
Because you can't read it.
Yeah, well, it's so small.
So we confirm classes. But, can I take a question for you?
Sure.
Can you plot the lines? Plot the way that go to that capacity actually form.
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I have it plotted out not just as the plan, but projected cost based upon medical CPI. So I know about 0.5% above what medical CPI is. I have to my chief finance officer and ask. And I go out and I do that. And I'll check that figure once every couple of years. If I give them all of those dollar figures, they know what we need to anticipate. If we need to move things out because we're projecting not to have those capital dollars, then we can do so. But at least we have a basic plan, and then we can modify it as we go down the road. Now, at 20 years planning out, I'm not going to be around. I have 10 years left, so to say. But it's my job to take care of the organization for the future. Because I'm gonna get patient care there until I'm 80 or 90 years old, because I'm not leaving this. Not unless Perry decides to pay me $1 billion and you become the Phoenix. Yeah.
And, because I don't, I thought we put it in here, but I guess we did. End of life of a piece of equipment is not always just the mechanics of it, and technology, it's the operating system. If anyone's ever had to deal with Microsoft.
Well, that's right.
Oh, he's good with
Operating system,
Yeah.
software, hardware, and
But so often the manufacturers, you know, I don't want to say lose track, they don't lose track. It doesn't stay, because it stand out sometimes. So you might have a room, an RF room that's working perfectly well, but then it's got the Sun Microsystem server on. I don't know if anybody knows, but Sun's been out of business for a while. It's not easy to get those. Rooms working fine. It hasn't ended life, so you just need to, again, there's a lot of, it's not just end of life, end of service life, it's the pieces that make it up.
Or we get into situations like we are now, where some of the devices that aren't listed as end of life, or are currently listed as end of life, but now, because of COVID and manufactured computer components, availability or lack thereof, I'm starting to see some decisions about possibly swinging stuff back and ending life sooner, because they just can't get components to support themselves. It's not their fault, it's just the nature of the industry because of COVID. We have to be adaptive to that.
So being, just a kind of condition at that point, so how does cybersecurity sort of fit?
Oh,
that's,
you know something, and that's the point that I missed making here, and I'll be quite honest with you. The spreadsheet I developed or the spreadsheet tool that I developed for St. Luke's has cybersecurity on it, okay? Is this a cybersecurity? Is it Windows 7? Is it anything before Windows 7? Okay, what type of risk? And I have a cybersecurity person, just like you do, you have a cybersecurity team. And we go through those things. As I gather that information, they go risk, high risk, low risk. Well, and that's what helps us plan for the future, because I might have to shift equipment based upon availability. And who knows what Microsoft's going to do with